Powered by thefundindustrymusttchange.com. It's time for the change investors need.
Welcome back to Squeezeplay. Today is the anniversary of the Supreme Court ruling which held that refugee claimants' rights to life, liberty, and security of the person are protected by our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But the law of the land did not do much to calm the waters when a boatload of Tamil migrants arrived in Canada last summer, erupting the country into a debate over how to handle asylum seekers. For more on this is Andy Lamey. He's the author of a new book, Frontier Justice, the Global Refugee Crisis, and What to Do About It. Andy, great to have you on the show.
Great to be here.
Now, there was a big debate, a big brouhaha over the landing of the Sun Sea. Many Canadians angry that the hundreds of thousands of people that were waiting in that citizenship queue that had gone through every legal step to enter this country properly and as full citizens had been jumped over by this group. You think that criticism's not only off the mark, you think actually Canada maybe is in some ways a gold standard internationally in terms of how to deal with illegal migrants?
I wouldn't quite go so far as to say gold standard, but I do think that criticism is a common misunderstanding. If you're a genuine refugee, there is in fact no queue. So the language of queue jumping, as common as it is misplaced. You're not taking someone else's place here in Canada if you arrive here and desperately need to get in here. So that criticism, I think, is not well made. And Canada is a problem state, like every state today. Every state today is disappointing in the way it treats genuine refugees. Nevertheless, there is a foundation of something good at the heart of Canada's refugee system, and it's the Supreme Court decision you mentioned earlier. Unlike many other countries, Canada recognizes that people who show up here who are not citizens have a basic minimum level of rights. They're not many rights, but compared to what other states do today, that's something that more Canadians should be aware of and proud of.
Explain, though, what you mean when you say that when refugees come here illegally, let's say through the Sun Sea, that they're not taking somebody else's place, but because we have a finite amount of resources in that country, in this country, and so if we're spending it on these refugees, it's not being spent on the ones that are still waiting to be processed, are they not?
The language of illegality is not appropriate here. It's not, in fact, illegal to run for your life and seek asylum if you're a real refugee. So if you're a real refugee, you're not breaking the law. There is nothing in law or logic that says every dollar we spend on people who come here by boat has to come out of the mouths of people in refugee camps. We certainly can do much more for other refugees, but if we're serious about helping them, we won't frame the issue in such a way that we can only help them at the expense of people who arrive here under their own power. In fact, the opposite seems to be the case. The better Western countries treat refugees who arrive under their own power in our shores tends to have a better follow-on effect in the third world. That is, other countries look to us as a model of what to do. So when we make our systems more difficult to access, it has a devastating after effect in the third world. So if we're serious about helping those overseas refugees, one of the best things we can do is strive to be a model country of first asylum.
What's that after effect, though?
The after effect is when we Western states make our systems more difficult to access, it's all too common for third world leaders to say, okay, all your talk about human rights, hypocrisy. If you don't have to let in refugees, neither do we. And so they'll slam shut the door. So, for example, as I talk about in the book, when the Americans made their asylum system more difficult to access, leaders in both Tanzania and Thailand said, we're going to do the same thing, and it had absolutely devastating implications for some of the world's most desperate refugees.
But Andy, here's what I'm thinking about. You know, there are these UN refugee camps where, you know, people have gathered, they've been properly identified and processed as refugees. They're in huge need. Yet, someone getting on a boat, paying a smuggler, and entering Canada illegally, they're incentivized by the very fact that we welcome them. So do you say to the person in the refugee camp, guess what, stay there, wait there, we'll get to you eventually, or are they better off getting on a boat and trying to sail into Canada as an illegal migrant?
I think it's unrealistic to think that everyone in a refugee camp could reach our shores under their own power. So again, we can do much more for that group. But Rudyard, if we're serious about helping them, we have to ask ourselves, is the barrier to us helping them the small, less than 1% of government spending that we spend on asylum seekers, or is the real barrier that we spend so much money on ourselves? That's where I would say we should look if we want to look for more resources. And again, there's nothing illegal about running for your life. Was it illegal for Jews to run from Nazi Germany into France and Switzerland? It certainly shouldn't have been. So if you are a genuine refugee, you are not breaking the law, you're certainly not breaking the law of Canada when you come here.
So I guess the question is, how do we know when they're genuine or not? Because I think there's a very common feeling among a lot of Canadians that we, in fact, in Canada are dupes a lot of the time, and that is why, for example, we imposed visas on Mexicans who claimed refugee status because, in fact, they weren't really running from anything in a lot of cases.
It is a fact of life that not everyone who makes a refugee claim is a bona fide refugee. It's a little bit like the legal system in that way. Sometimes innocent and guilty people both go through the legal system. So we face a similar challenge of sorting out the well-founded claims from the unfounded ones. But there's no other way to do that than to have some sort of investigation, because there are two ways that those decisions could go wrong. We could let in somebody who's not a real refugee, but even worse, I would argue, would be to turn away someone who really is. In terms of Mexico, that's one of the most devastating things Canada has done in a long time. Mexico is a dangerous place. It's sad that we've imposed that condition on people there.
Andy, any sense that Canada can afford the luxury of a very liberal refugee policy because of our geographic location? We're not sitting on the northern half of the Mediterranean with tens of thousands of migrants pouring across our borders, which we increasingly, or at least in the case of France or Italy, are having challenges controlling. So to what degree is this just a circumstance of geography and necessity as opposed to a deeply held philosophical moral belief?
Well, it's funny, every country where they have these debates, they always say, our geography is the wrong geography to be a country of asylum. There's always some reason. We're too far away from the crisis zones. We're too close to the crisis zones. It seems there's no such thing as the ideal geographic location. I would say just treatment should not depend on where you are. And I think there is a well-grounded philosophical rationale for this. And it's a commitment to the basic minimum of the idea that human beings can have rights, even if they're not citizens of our state.
Okay, Andy, we're going to have to leave it there, but congratulations on Frontier Justice, the Global Refugee Crisis, and what to do with it.
Thanks.
All right, and coming up, once the budget gets back into shape, Stephen Harper wants to make it easier for you to trim the fat. We're going to talk about that after the break.